Today we're going to talk about signs that your insecure ex will come back. First things first, what is an insecure ex? Well, personally, I define an insecure ex as someone with some type of insecure attachment style. So either they're overly anxious, overly avoidant, sometimes both. Now, in the past, I've written articles, filmed videos, all sorts about the signs that your ex is considering coming back, but we've never really done that within a theme. So this video is going to heavily focus on those signs that an insecure ex is interested in coming back to you. And yes, the signs are slightly different than just the generalized signs that an ex will come back. So let's just jump right into it. Sign number 1, understanding the nudge principle. All right, first things first. Before we understand or need to learn about the nudge principle, we kind of need to talk about attachment styles. But there's one that I really want to focus on for this video, and that's avoidance. So according to our internal research, most people going online and typing in signs an ex will come back or what are the signs they'll come back, those kinds of people tend to have anxious attachment styles, while their exes tend to be avoidant by nature. In fact, we actually did a poll in 2021 where we quizzed people in our private Facebook support group and asked them, hey, what core attachment style would you classify your ex as? And over 70% of the poll answerers, for lack of a better term, picked avoidant and fearful. So insecure attachment styles kind of ruled breakups. This is why it's really important to understand why we're focusing so much on avoidant attachment styles throughout this YouTube channel. So what is an avoidant attachment style? Simply put, you're considered to have an avoidant attachment style if you crave intimacy, but you don't let anyone close enough to give you that intimacy. So you're valuing self-sufficiency and independence in relationships pretty much more than anything else. In fact, the perfect relationship for an avoidant is one where you can almost always have one foot out the door. So if this sounds like your ex, then you are definitely watching the right video. Okay, so what does the nudge principle have to do with anything? What is the nudge principle? Well, a few years ago, I did an interview with Coach Anna, one of the coaches on ex-boyfriend recovery and ex-girlfriend recovery, and she was the one that sort of came up with the principle of the nudge concept. So what is the nudge principle? Well, the nudge principle is simply when a dumper entertains the idea that they may potentially be thinking of reconnecting with you. And when they do that, they'll send like these subtle tests your way to see how you'll react. What they're looking for is a sign that indicates that you want them back. Now, these subtle tests will usually be slight and insignificant, so much so that you won't even recognize them as tests. So some of the most popular examples of nudges are subtle flirting, seeing how you respond to future pacing, seeing how you respond to bringing up the past. And it fits really with the insecure attachment avoidant theme. They don't want to let you close, so they'd rather put you through a series of internal tests before they allow themselves time to open up to you. Kind of like a boxer would slowly jab to soften an opponent's defenses up before they throw that knockout shot. That's the nudge principle, and it's the first sign that an insecure attachment style would really exhibit if they're interested in getting back with you. The second sign has to do with nostalgic reverie. So one of the biggest insights that we've been able to glean from avoidance is this concept of nostalgic reverie. So what is that? Well, generally speaking, an avoidant will not allow themselves time or an opportunity to miss an ex until they feel like that ex has moved on. And only when they feel like that has occurred will they give themselves permission to grieve and reminisce about the past. And this is often why we see avoidance reaching out so far after the breakup. They fall victim to what I term the phantom ex syndrome. Essentially, they long for an ex that they can no longer have. Only then does the nostalgia kick in for them. And I've even pointed out towards sort of this interesting time dilation factor here. So our research indicates that anxious individuals tend to grieve immediately during the onset of a breakup, where avoidant individuals, they typically don't start until they feel kind of safe, and they only feel safe when you've moved on. We also know that it's rare for an avoidant to reach out to you after a breakup in general. The exception there, of course, is during this nostalgic reverie time, when they're at the height of remembering the good times. More on that in a minute. Usually when they're in this space, that's when you'll receive a reach out to them. So when does this typically happen? Well, I've seen this take as long as a year before. Probably the quickest I've ever seen is about 1.5 months. So do with that what you will. Real quick, I want to say that if you're new to this YouTube channel or you're trying to figure out what you should be doing to get your ex back and you're trying to learn if you even have a chance in your specific circumstance, probably the smartest thing for you to do is actually stop by our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, or take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz that can be found at exboyfriendrecovery.com. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, taking that free quiz is super easy to do. All you have to simply do is look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. It will take you directly to the quiz where you can fill it out and get an easy answer on what you should be doing going forward and overall what your chances look like in your specific situation. All right, so let's get you back to the video. Sign number 3, they give themselves permission to be emotionally intimate with you. So what do we know about the most common insecure attachment style stuff with our clients? We know that pretty much avoidants value their independence more than anything else. And they like to exist in the space where they can daydream about you but never let you close enough to provide what they want. And that's the great paradox of the avoidant. They crave intimacy, yet they won't let you close enough to provide it for them. And probably, in my opinion, the best representation of this I've seen depicted in Hollywood comes from the movie 500 Days of Summer. And essentially, the beautiful part about this movie is it charts the relationship breakup and post-breakup period of a couple. We have Tom, our protagonist, and Summer, who actually plays sort of the antagonist of this. And of course, the movie is named after Summer, 500 Days of Summer. So it's 500 days in the relationship between these two people. And what is interesting about Tom, when you look at his character in that movie, he exhibits all the natural characteristics of someone with an anxious attachment style. He's desperate to get a girlfriend. He does crazy things to get said girlfriend. He breaks out into crazy dances because of said girlfriend. All very anxious attachment style. Maybe not so much the dancing part, which is kind of a normal thing. But then, of course, we have Summer. And what's interesting is Summer is kind of the classic avoidant. She wants love, but she doesn't want to let Tom close enough to properly receive that love. And the beauty of this movie is that I think it's a perfect example of what an avoidant and an anxious pairing looks like in real life. It's great at first, but by the end, the anxious person's constant need for validation exasperates the avoidant and they end up leaving. Nevertheless, there is one part of the film that I think is really incredibly profound and gives us sort of a key insight into when an avoidant allows themselves to be vulnerable. So essentially, all this stuff has happened, and finally, maybe at the midpoint of the movie, we see Summer, and she starts opening up to Tom. She starts telling him things that she's never told him before, and she literally says, "I've never told anyone that before." To which Tom responds, "Well, I guess I'm not just anybody." It's in this moment that she allows herself to be emotionally vulnerable. And the scene obviously ends with her saying, "I've never told anyone that before." And that's such a key moment because we see this with avoidance. If you can get them to open up to you on this level, then it's an incredibly good sign. Now, here's the rub, and this is where it gets fascinating. Usually, if you do get them to open up to you on this level, they're telling you about things they've never told anyone before, they're being emotionally vulnerable with you, the next day they completely disappear. Why? Well, that's where sign number 4 comes into play. Sign number 4 is the fishing pole analogy begins to work. All right, so my advice for dealing with an avoidant/insecure attachment style can be pretty much summed up in one phrase. When they pull back, you pull back. And this is something that the anxious person has an incredibly hard time with because the anxious person is ruled by a fear of abandonment. That's part of their core wound of why they're so anxious. But the analogy I always like to use is it's kind of like going fishing. So imagine you have this ex who you're trying to figure out if they want you back or not, but they're extremely hot and cold with you, which is a common thing that avoidants will do. Sometimes they'll allow themselves to open up and then boom, they disappear. Most people make the mistake of basically reeling that ex in, trying to get answers, aggressively approaching for this definitive answer of whether or not they want you back or not. Yet what we found is when we studied the successful people, they take a more nuanced approach. They try to reel their ex in, in. But when their ex kind of has this avoidant side come out, when that avoidant nature rears its ugly head, they actually pull away or disappear as they're giving their ex space. They don't disappear completely, but when they sense that ex is pulling away or disappearing, they give their ex space to kind of be in their feelings. And they just continually do this time and time again. And pretty soon what you start to notice is that fish starts to get reeling in, and it's getting closer and it's getting closer, and they're opening up to you more and more. And sometimes our clients are doing this naturally without recognizing it at all, but all they're really doing is giving their ex space, which is exactly what someone with a secure attachment style would do. And this leads us to our fifth and final sign. Sign number 5, they focus on the peak moments a lot. So I'm pretty sure people get annoyed when I talk about this because I talk about it a lot, but the peak end rule is a psychological concept that you really need to understand. So what is it? Well, it basically posits that our memories are based on 2 distinct points. We're not really great at remembering an experience in its entirety, but we're really great at compartmentalizing memories and experiences based on 2 points: the peak moments of the experience, either positive or negative, and the end moments of the experience. So in simple terms here, let's imagine you have a breakup with your ex. When you're thinking back on the relationship years later, you're thinking of usually 2 distinct points. You're thinking of really the good times, all the great times, maybe potentially a few of the bad times in the middle of the relationship, and then you're thinking about how the relationship ended. You're kind of forgetting all of the monotony of the day-to-day of the relationship. And this sort of harkens back to sign number 2 with the nostalgic reverie. So generally speaking, what happens is that when we have an insecure ex that goes through a nostalgic reverie moment, they start thinking back to those peak positive moments that the two of you were together. So one of the best signs that you can use to determine if your ex wants you back is to pay attention to the peak memories they're bringing up. It's incredibly rare for an avoidant to bring up a memory that's emotionally charged. So if they're doing so and it's positive relating to you, it gives you some insight into what's going on in their head.